Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna alhamdulillah wa kafah. Wa salatu wa salamu ala rasul al-Mustafa. Wa ala ibadi alladhina irtada. Wa man bihudahum ihtada. Wa bi athari ahli al-Madinah iktafa. Wa ba'd. Assalamu Allahi ala al-qawm. Ahlan wa sahlan bikum. Marhaban people. Alright, so let's inshallah begin this live. All the questions you've got boiled and bottled. Oh, Shaban, any of the questions coming on the, if you just keep a tab on them, because I won't be able to see them from here. Guys, you can send in your questions, but they're being monitored. Cool, so alright, what's bothering the Birmingham folk, the pleasant folk of Birmingham? So, we'll start, or shall we begin with, who wants to begin with the question?
Not quite. Muhammad Hijab had a debate with Alex.
He's always name dropping Ibrahim, isn't he?
Muhammad Hijab had a debate with who?
Alex.
No.
Alex. Okay.
Are you familiar? You watched
That
the
debate I haven't watched, no.
Oh, okay. He's done a book as well.
Muhammad Hijab?
Yes.
Okay.
It's number 1 on the best on Amazon in the atheist section.
Okay.
So I thought you were familiar. That's the question I wanted to ask you
Okay,
about.
okay.
And Alex is one of the top YouTube atheist academics.
Oh, right,
And
okay.
he just destroyed him. I want you to comment upon that.
Acha.
He
So,
debated.
who's authored the book?
Muhammad Hijab. It's number 1.
What's it called?
Kalam
Cosmological argument.
Cosmological
I've
Argument.
seen that,
Acha.
It's number
Okay.
1 on the atheist section. It's beaten Richard Dawkins' book.
Okay, as in it's doing good?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what's
I
the...
thought you could comment on the...
Cosmological Argument?
No, about his debate with him.
I haven't watched his
That's
debate, so I'll watch it and then... कहाँ फुर्सत मिलती है यार?
I thought you watched
So
it.
many TV series to catch up on. So many, they have so many seasons nowadays. I mean, who wants to sit there watching this? Right, so... So anyway, chalo, we'll move on from that.
What were your
Once
thoughts
I've
on it,
watched
bro?
it...
What were your thoughts on it?
Are you trying to say it's...
Sorry?
He destroyed it.
Really?
Who's he?
Muhammad Hijab destroyed it.
Destroyed the other guy.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And he proved using his own arguments.
Mm-hmm.
But the English was like philosophy, top level English. So a lot of the lay people couldn't understand.
Okay, I mean, you see, these arguments are old arguments. The cosmological... I haven't read his book, but just generally, the cosmological argument, the ontological argument, the teleological argument, these arguments for saying, can we prove God exists? So, whether you're going to go to... these are all Aristotelian, all kind of by the Greek philosophers, more or less, and then Muslims have refined some of them. So, whether we're going to say that things have a purpose, so we see purpose in the world and therefore we see design. And if we see design, surely there must have been an intelligent designer. So that's the teleological argument. The cosmological with the prime mover and the first, like if everything is in motion, there must have been something that was not in motion that put it in motion. Otherwise you have infinite regress. Now, the ontological argument about the essence, the fact that you can feel and understand, fathom something which is God, which we can't generally fathom. So the fact that we can do this means there must be some kind of God out there. These arguments are all good, but personally, my understanding is that these are good to give a bit of support, a bit of, to help people who are looking for something. I don't know about saying that these things prove 100%. They're not like, I don't think, it's not like saying the way we accept mathematics or we accept something, that just because you say that there's design in something, there must be an intelligent design. But I feel that the overwhelming likelihood demonstrates that. So there's a difference between saying that, we have a lot of support for saying there is a God as opposed to there isn't a God. That's what I would go with personally, as opposed to saying to people that we can prove 100% there is a God. Because in all honesty, you can't prove 100% from these arguments. These are just rational kind of gymnastics. Like we say to people, look, there's a design. And then they can question that as well. I mean, like they have in many cases, they've said, well, they've shown things, for example, which demonstrate design but don't have Or they've said that it doesn't prove that there's one God. There could have been there could have been multiple gods. There could have been many gods. There could have been a gang of gods. There could have been anything. Like, so, it's not like these arguments, back and forth. They're fun. They're good. I think they are helpful. They help, and I would definitely encourage them, but not in the way some people push them, as in certain. This is ilmul yaqeen. Now that you know this, there's no denying that there's a God. It doesn't work like that. In my understanding, Allahu a'lam. But that's, once again, that's not a comment on Muhammad Hijab's thing, because I haven't read his thing. So, I think it's okay to say that we are not. We have, as human beings, we have some doubt. It's okay to say that. I don't think. See, one of the things is, when I said this once before, somebody said, "Oh, you're supporting agnosticism." I'm not supporting agnosticism in that sense, but I'm just saying that it is true that arguably every human being to some extent is just agnostic. To some extent, on a spectrum, but then we have our inclination. We're not like, hyperbolic kind of like OCD, agnosticism on steads. Everybody's saying, "Oh my God, I don't know. Are you sure? I don't know if I'm sure. I don't know if I'm..." I don't mean like that kind of agnostic, but ultimately, true. People like scientists will say that, can you say with certainty that something is? And I suppose you can't. There's some things that we just have faith that, we believe. That's our understanding. The belief of God is not counter-rational. It's not irrational. It's not counter-reason. It's not an irrational belief. True, we don't have empirical evidence for it, but it's not counter-reason to say that there's a God that created everything. So, yeah, that's what I would go with. And I think a lot of the people, even when I speak to some atheists, one thing that they kind of agree with is that they feel that, because some people have said to me, some atheists, that look, you always give primacy to reason, you always do this, you always do this. How can you really believe? Like, if you're going to be honest, like, why do you believe? Like, why are you still a Muslim, or why? Because it doesn't sound like you would think that you could see through all of this. And I've said that, look, in my understanding, that the fact that I can understand things as a human, like you can, I don't mean like some genius understand, I just mean normal. Fact that we can fathom things, we have consciousness. Consciousness in that, I don't just mean being awake, but consciousness, like with a capital C. So, in that sense, I feel that there must be some meaning to it. There must be something greater out there. This can't just amount to nothing. That's in my understanding. And to be fair, a lot of them kind of agree with that sentiment. Although they don't like to buy into it, but they agree with that sentiment that it's true that, is this just all nonsense? Is it all just, just randomized cohesion of stuff, and then it just withers away and it's nothing? But then what about the experiences, the feelings, the emotions, the understanding, the comprehension? Like that must mean something. So, I don't know, that's my thoughts on these things. Allahu A'lam.
We'll take one question online also.
Go on then. Let's go for a live question.
Ovno is asking about the moon sighting. Should it be local or international?
Who's asking?
This chap called Ovno.
Ovno.
They're saying if international, then
Ovno's
why not just Saudi then, if you're going to go international anyway?
Ovno's a bit late. Acha, preparing for the next Ramadan. He's a year ahead. So, there was the question being that about should we go with regional or global moon sighting? What should we go with? There was a time many years back, or several years back for myself, where I was a bit passionate about these things. And I've still got some of the things on Facebook where I've said, look, looking at the evidence, we should go with just regional. And that's what the evidence dictates. And to be fair, the evidence does seem to dictate that. The classical understanding of the fuqaha did dictate that you go with your understanding. So Ibn Rushd will write that, look, he says that nobody believes in his time that if you lived in Al-Andalus, you would be going by, which is Spain, that you would be going by Hijaz, which is Saudi Arabia, or Khurasan, which is Afghanistan. He said, like in his time, like that's, he said, like by agreement, like nobody thinks even those who say that we go by global, they don't mean global on that scale. But then one could argue that because in his time, how could the news possibly reach from Khorasan to Hijaz, or from Hijaz to Andalusia? One could argue, but and I accept that with time things have become a global village, like we've become that kind of a world. But still, I feel if we're looking at the evidence, it does seem regional. Like with our prayer times, everything is regional. So in the UK, it would either be calculated, or it would be with any country you could go in. Like, so for example, the UK is aligned with Morocco with its general timeline. So the time we have here, so now let's say it's 10 to 9, it's 10 to 9 in Morocco as well. So we share a similar horizon. They're on GMT as well. So that's a good, like you could go with Morocco like certain Muslims do. So that was, I mean, this is the ruling. I was quite very passionate about it before. Now I kind of feel that still is the ruling, but I feel that, like, what difference does it really make? Like, if people are, you know, if somebody wants to go with, wa alaikum assalam. So if somebody wants to go with something being announced, because social media's made everything so, we're getting text messages on WhatsApp. Somebody's
so matured.
Yeah, exactly. So now I just feel like, what's the big deal? Like, you know, if somebody wants to go with Saudi, if somebody wants to go, really there was no such opinion as following Saudi. There was just an opinion that you could go global. It wasn't restricted to Saudi Arabia. Indonesia could declare it and you could go with Indonesia, like according to that ruling. But just the way the culture has developed, that Saudi, when it comes to moon sighting, has become the kind of cultural capital, and everybody looks to them, good or bad. I'm not passing judgment, but the point is that they do it. They have been, I feel that personally, clumsy on certain things, but
Mufti, can I just ask, sorry to interject here, but isn't there kind of an irony around following Saudi Arabia globally? Because Saudi themselves will only promote local.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Yeah, for them it's always a local sighting. They do not advocate global sightings at all.
They say that very clearly.
The irony is now, for you're following a nation which itself promotes only local, but yet you follow them on a global premise.
Sure. That's people you can't see, but that's I can't flip the camera. That's Ustad Atif, big muscles. Those of you that see him, I have to agree. Looking at those biceps,
Is he gonna flip the camera?
I agree. Fatwa.
If you're gonna flip the camera, let me do some press ups first.
Right. So I agree that, look, Saudi. I think personally, they're a bit clumsy with their thing. I don't mean that in a way that, you know, we as people ain't clumsy, but I'm just saying that having a system where anybody can just say, I've seen the moon, they don't have to be a verified body. They could just be, like, you could just phone and say, I've seen the moon, and say, are you sure? Are you Muslim? I'm Muslim.
Isn't it a cleaner system just to stick with the Sunnah? I mean,
yeah.
What is the harm?
Yeah, but
in everybody looking at their local moon.
True. So like,
the moon does go everywhere, right?
Exactly. So I would agree with that. Like, if you go back to, I'm not saying, like, in most Muslim countries they have a kind of authenticated body, like in each major city, that is looking out for the moon. So normal, like, let's say Pakistan as an example, local people can look out for the moon. If they've seen it, they must inform their local kind of that body which is sitting in their city. So Birmingham would have one as an example. We would contact them if I've seen the moon. They would also be looking out for the moon, and they would be trained, and they would verify as well, yes, or they would deny. Now, I think that's a bit more systematic, but the other issue is, and this isn't new, this goes back to the time, in fact, it was the ruling of Imam Abu Hanifa, that he had said that if the moon, like, unless you're going to say there was very, like, let's say it was a very cloudy night, so it's possible that you just saw the moon. But if it's a clear night, like as in reasonably good enough, there must be what he used to call istifada. That means many people, like if, let's say 10,000 people are looking for the moon, then several people must see it. I'm not saying all, but several. For just 2 people to say out of, let's say, 2 million that we saw the moon is an issue, because that's dubious circumstances. Because if everybody's actively looking for the moon, and then only 2 Bedouins in a desert somewhere say, yeah, I saw it, And then you're like, oh. So I think that system is flawed given the... So that's... And this thing of saying that just because you're a Muslim, everything must be always fine. I mean, you could be a Muslim and your eyesight's messed up. You could be a Muslim and you could be motivated with other reasons. You could be pranking, you could be doing anything. You could just have mental health issues. You could be hallucinating. There could be many things. Just because you're a Muslim doesn't mean it's a clean check. That, oh, do you say the Shahada? You say the Shahada, mashallah. You know, you're not one of the companions that has lived on. You're just a regular person. So I disagree with their system. That said, and I accept that there was no historical thing as following Saudi. That said, if people want to follow it today, which they are following, so whether I like it or I don't like it, personally I don't like the fact that Saudi Arabia are a cultural capital for Islam. I personally am uneasy with that, but they are. It's not like
that. I agree with you.
Yeah, so they are. You know, whether I like it or don't like it, I can't do anything about it. So they are the cultural capital for many things on Islam, unfortunately, and especially moon sighting. So they're going to make an announcement, and much of the world is just going to follow. So if they follow, I mean, I don't really think now coming away from that, looking at the Sharia, does the Sharia get all concerned? Imagine we got it wrong. Let's say the Bedouin just visualized it, a mirage. He thought, like they think they saw water, he thought he saw the moon. And he got it wrong. 2 Bedouins got it wrong, let's say, or 5 or 10, whatever. Saudi Arabia gets it wrong. I don't think it's personally a big deal in the sense of, and people have to explain that now, like I don't think that, you see, the purpose of Islam was these things are there, they're honoured. And people are honouring them. They're not, like, even if you're getting them wrong, I don't think the purpose was, like, it's like Allah saying in the Quran, look, when you offer sacrifice, the meat of these animals and these things don't reach God. It's only the sentiment that counts. Like when you're offering a sacrifice, this ain't going to float up to God or anything. So when you're praying, if you've prayed and you've gone in, you've seen a mihrab, you've thought this is the Qibla, you've prayed, it was wrong. Doesn't matter, like you still prayed, it was your sentiment, it was not... So this is why I feel with years that have gone by as well, and age, I suppose, or I don't know, I feel that it's not so much of a big deal. But I still feel the regional thing is the more accurate one, but it's out of our control now. So, I mean, if people do it, they do it.
So why do you have to see the moon work when you use calculations?
I feel you can use calculations because...
Is that better?
Yeah, I would say definitely. And I would say there's no harm in doing both. Like, so if you have a calculation basis, so you say like the moon sighting, let's say websites or the astronomical data tells us that the moon cannot be seen today. I think if it's a negative, declaration of negative sighting by calculations, then any sighting should be ignored.
Yeah.
Like personally, I think that's a given. That would be, because you cannot clash with mathematics and science. It just doesn't work because 2 people have said they've seen it and it's impossible. But if there's, let's say it states that they can be sighting, like sometimes it states there's a potential, and then somebody cites it so it can complement each other. That's what I feel that's good. But even if nobody saw it, but it said that it's clear, like it's going to be there today, and there could be clouds and things, so I think there's no harm in going with calculations. The hadith in the Prophet's time, sumu li ru'yatihi wa aftiru li ru'yatihi, that fast by seeing it, and obviously ru'yatihi, as the Shafi'iyya said then as well, did mean ilm, like by its sight, by fast up by its sight, by having seen it, meant by having known as well of it, like having its knowledge. So I think there's no harm in that personally. We shouldn't be, I think, it's 2019, we've got to move on a bit as well. We can't just all be, there's no harm in visual sighting, but we should also embrace technology.
I know we argued it's 2019, but it seems to be getting particularly worse, particularly this issue.
The moon sighting.
The moon sighting. And if the observatory reports are as accurate as they can be, then surely we should look to...
I agree, definitely. Yeah. The observatory reports we should definitely go with. But I meant there's no harm in complementing it with an actual sighting. Yeah. There's no harm in that. So that's what I meant. Ustad Yasin. Ahlan wa sahlan.
There's something quite disturbing on that. That's quite a few scholars actually trashing science.
Okay.
Because of this, mention and some of them even written an article that this science that they're using is not qat'i, it's dhanni. But they've even used Islamic terms. And I'm thinking, mate, it's the same science that's telling you about Maghrib. You know, and they said no, we follow Quran and Sunnah. And science is there as a secondary thing. It's quite
it's a shame that you see. I think one of the biggest mistakes we can make in our generation, and I think Muslims in the West especially. So I think in this sense we're at the focal point of this. So I think we're at the focal. The biggest mistake we can make is to put ourselves at heads with science, like to go up against science. Islam has never been in. You see, science simply means an observation of the world around you, in its very broad definition. That's all it is. It's just an observation of the world around you, whether it's beginning with the human anatomy or whether it's your environment or the laws of that environment and the atmosphere. That's all science actually is in its very broad definition. It's been built upon very testable data, empirical. There's no need to say religion is against that. That is a fight that we are going to not only lose, but miserably lose with great humiliation. And we have a precedent before us of the Catholic Church and of Christianity, and especially Catholicism or the Vatican. We've seen how they lost miserably to this fight against science. I mean, you know, so if we can't, you know, Allah says, Inna fi dhalika la'ibr, you know, there's ibra fa'atabiru ya ulil albab. That can't you even take heed from things like this? So why go against science? I think it's, if anything in science, if there's things like this, astronomical data, it's just stupid to go against because these are like mathematical. But if science comes up with something, if it's a new theory, I'm not saying you have to wholeheartedly just blindly follow, but you can understand what is it saying, and you can see the research on it. Has it been confirmed? Has it been, you know, what's the data saying on this? If it's a new theory on something, sure, I mean, people may refute it, people may go, but if it's something that's been established, that time and time again the data has affirmed the theories, then it's stupid to be saying, oh, it's just a theory, oh, it's just this, oh, it's just that. These things make religion look outdated. They make people run away from religion. They make people think, you know, this astronomy thing you had. I saw something recent this Ramadan in Saudi. It was on the news that the astronomers were kind of at it with the ulama, and they were having debates like who has primacy on the saying, who dictates the month of Ramadan. Is it the ulama, the clergy, or is it the observatory kind of people? And it's ridiculous because if you watch some of the interviews of the ulama, they'll say things like let's say the observatory will say it's impossible to have seen the moon. So now there's a previous interview I once watched. There was this one, but there was a previous one, I think about 2 years ago, where the observatory report in Saudi said, no, it's impossible for that sighting to have happened. And then they interviewed the sheikh, and the sheikh says, look, listen, you know, is Muslim? Alhamdulillah. The Prophet said, if a Muslim comes, we accept it. And they said, you know, but Ahlul Falakiyat, they're saying that it was impossible. He goes, look, Inna Allah ala kulli shayin qadir. You know, Allah is qadir upon everything. Are you questioning the qudra of Allah? You think, well, you know, obviously he's clearly eligible for disability benefits, right? So the thing is, this is a stupid, because that's not how the qudra of Allah works. The qudra of Allah isn't going to change the laws of, in the Quran you have, you know, that Allah says sunnat Allah, that He has وَلَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. You'll never find the way, the sunnah that Allah has set out in nature and things to ever change. So to say that, oh no, God changed it, but He changed it because, oh, maybe He changed it. It doesn't work like that. So, did you want to say
Yeah, I mean, all I wanted to comment on was because it's not a contemporary struggle of our times, is it?
Yeah, it's not.
This struggle between modernity,
Yeah.
and embracing modernity,
Absolutely.
and I'll refer to them as a cultural capital of Islam, because most of this comes out of Saudi Arabia. There's no doubt within that, because you can look over the last few centuries, even look at the latter part of the 18th century. You know, the opposition to using the printing press.
No, true. That was embarrassing.
That was embarrassing.
Very embarrassing.
The opposition to using printing press.
Yeah.
So you had the Europeans who were just churning out, thousands of pages and reams and books of literature, and where the Muslim world was debating whether or not we could actually use a printing press in order to press,
That's
so we have suffered before
massively,
as well.
and it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing because in time to come, like nobody would even think now. Like, look, imagine now the question of a printing press. Nobody would even think that's an issue.
That's right.
Like,
But
you
it
wouldn't
wasn't.
even think that.
Yeah.
Why would they problem? It's like second nature to us that, that's obvious. It's halal. But they were going, kufar, haram, you got that screaming face.
And we suffered because
So, yeah, massively. And I agree with you. And I think this is why it's one of the biggest mistakes we can make in our time is to put ourselves against science. Like, we don't need to. There's no need. That's like there isn't even a fight, and we're just picking a fight, and we're picking a fight that we're going to definitely lose. So it just makes no sense. But these issues. So what else is apart from the moon?
Somebody asked about explain the concept of jizya.
Oh. Jizya. All right, what else is there? How come I can't hear any questions?
Mufti, can I just ask for some clarity on Bukhari Gate?
Clarity on Bukhari Gate.
On Bukhari Gate.
Okay.
Because look, forgive me for my ignorance, and maybe
No,
I misunderstood something. Okay. I think you mentioned somewhere in one of your talks here that from Bukhari all the way back to the Tabi'in and the Sahaba, we've got a sound chain.
We've got chains.
We got chains for that, yeah? However, the transmission of Bukhari and how it came about coming to us, that's where there are issues.
Question marks.
Question marks and things like this, yeah? So, when you mean you got the sound chain, yeah, you're not actually saying that what the contents of Bukhari, what we have today, and which I would accept here, supports a certain minhaj and a certain path and a certain way of thinking, i.e. the Saudi culture, supports that. So what we're saying, we've got the chain, we've got a chain which goes back from Bukhari, but it doesn't support the content.
So what Bukhari Gate is, those of you who haven't seen my Bukhari Gate clips, our videos, they're on YouTube. But it was an issue I raised, a scandal, so to say, last year, caused quite a bit of heat. Right now, it was basically what I was saying is that Bukhari, by no standard, is like 100% error-proof or foolproof. It's not by any standard. And I know people say that anyway. They say, well, that's a given. No, it isn't, because they treat it that way. And I don't just mean as in there's a potential. I actually demonstrated what some of the key issues were with Sahih Bukhari. And I chose Bukhari as an example, not because you could choose any book of hadith, but because of the status that Bukhari has received. Unfortunately, it's been placed above everything in Islam, above the Quran, above the Sunnah. It's been ironically, it is Islam, one could argue, is Bukhari centric. So Bukhari is in the center and everything kind of goes around it. So to disrupt this pattern, what I had said was that there is a different debate, which I wasn't getting into, which was about how authentic are hadith anyway.
Okay.
That's a different debate, as in, because it is true that nobody began to really document hadith till at least like probably 150 years after the Prophet. About 100 and let's say 20, 100 and if we want thorough documentation. So they began around 90 years after the Prophet, the project with Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, but that was without chains. That was just putting them together under Shihab Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri. But then within maybe the years that followed him, they started to compile chains as well, like we have hadith. So within the next maybe 2 decades, they had it together. So this is over 100 years after the Prophet. Those books don't generally, those compilations don't generally survive. What we have is, the oldest book we probably have is the Muwatta of Imam Malik. The popular books that we have after him, they are probably about 250 years after the Prophet. So Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, books like this. So that's a different question, that how is it that we know those things are authentic? Because people never wrote them down till, you know, if I was going to talk about somebody 250 years ago, 200 years ago, how do I know that that's so accurate? That's a different debate. Bukhari Gate wasn't actually focusing on that. That is a question and a challenge. That's a different challenge. Bukhari Gate was saying, okay, let's take that as a given for now. Let's assume that the hadith are correct. So from Imam Bukhari, his teachers going back to the Prophet in that chain, let's accept that as good enough right now. So we're giving, that's kind of like, we're starting off on some given ground there. The issue is, how do we know that the book we have today, the Bukhari book we have today, is Imam Bukhari's book? How do you know that? Now, there isn't a single manuscript that survives from Imam Bukhari's book. There's nothing on earth. Right? We don't have his book anywhere. His actual book. Now, we don't have his student's book. In fact, the books we have, the oldest partial manuscripts, are probably maybe 4th generation after him. So you've got like a huge, and then it's not just that, you see. I wasn't trying to say that I think the whole book is made up. I wasn't saying that. I was saying that there is a considerable amount of doubt in some things in that book. How do we know this? We know this because, contrary to popular belief, Imam Bukhari's book in his day and age wasn't rated. Like, I know today we think Imam Bukhari's book was really rated in his day and age. It wasn't. There were other great Hufaz of Hadith that didn't think anything of his book. They didn't ever big it up. They didn't, like people like Abu Zur'a, the 2 legendary Razis, like Abu Hatim al-Razi, Abu Zur'a al-Razi, who were contemporaries and senior to Imam Bukhari. Like, they were seen as more greater in Ilm al-Hadith. They never rated his. There was Abu Zur'a al-Dimashqi, there was Abu Zur'a there were other great muhaddith who were seen as major muhaddithin in his time. I'm not saying his book isn't worth all that. I'm just saying that they, like, if you're judging by his contemporaries, his actual contemporaries, not those who came after him, his actual contemporaries, they might praise him. I'm not saying they belittled him. They did think he was good. They did think that. He was definitely a genius of his own standing. There's no debate about that. What they really seemed to praise was his Rijal book. So Abu Zur'a al-Razi and Abu Hatim and those people really praise his Tarikh al-Kabir. So Imam Bukhari has a book on narrators. They were really impressed with that. So a lot of them, if you look at his contemporaries, they only seem to be speaking about his Tarikh al-Kabir. They don't talk about his Sahih. Nobody seems to think it's anything too impressive to talk about. Now, they do talk about his Tarikh al-Kabir. In fact, one of these contemporary scholars presents it to the king at the time, saying that, wow, this is such an amazing, nobody's authored something like this. Then Imam Bukhari gets scandalized, unfortunately. I think unfairly scandalized. Some people watch my Bukhari Gate, I don't know what the hell they were listening to. They thought I was dissing Imam Bukhari. I wasn't. I was saying Imam Bukhari in his time was dissed by people. I actually sympathize with him and say that they were wrong for, persecuting him. So they persecute him. So he spent several years towards the end of his life, the latter maybe 10 years of his life or more. Around that time he spent just in misery. He's not this huge celebrity in his day and age that people think that he ought to be. I feel he ought to be. He was a genius, but he wasn't recognized for that. Most people, because of this scandal, whatever the scandal, there's mixed views on what the scandal was. But for whatever it was, some people say, it was to do with religious stuff. Scandals are never to do with religious stuff. Religious stuff is usually always the pretext, it's an excuse. So whatever it was, they decided to get back at him. They expelled him from all these cities, ostracized him. He wasn't allowed entry into Bukhara, where he was from. He wasn't allowed, like he was chucked out of many of like the key cities, Baghdad and other places. Although he would just travel. He had in his lifetime so many students. He did have students, there's no question. But many scholars did, and he was a great scholar. You see, the issue is, because in his last few years of his life, people stopped transmitting hadith from him because of the whole scandal. So nobody wanted to be blacklisted. So it's like, I suppose I could take my own example. I'm bloody radioactive, so I'm so toxic that if people are like, oh yeah, that's an interesting thing, but I can't say Mufti Abu Layth said it, because then people just say he's a deviant. So you're taking it from a deviant. So this is how it becomes. So people obviously don't want to touch something that is presumably toxic. So understandable. Hota hai yaar. Right, but फिर भी कभी-कभी touch हो जाता है. But the point is that, so they still thought that the guy's talented, but they used to kind of be weary. Most people abandoned him, and he had 1-2 people that still stood by him. Imam Muslim is an example. Imam Muslim stood by him, but then even Imam Muslim left him. What's that? He says, "Baat tere jaane jaan, dil mein raha ajab sama. Yaad teri yahan rahi, phir teri yaad bhi gayi." Now that's the. So this is Imam Bukhari. He, like, even Imam Muslim then kind of ditched him and thought, you know what, I love you, but my reputation is obviously on the line here. So hence Imam Muslim, despite being Imam Bukhari's his student, never transmits any hadith from him. There's no hadith in Sahih Muslim ever going through Imam Bukhari. He doesn't ever transmit from him because he's toxic. He doesn't want to include his name. In fact, one could argue that the Muqaddimah, the introduction of Imam Muslim, where he's refuting an individual, could argue, it is Imam Bukhari who is refuting in his Muqaddimah, but the tone he uses, one could argue, is quite disrespectful. One could argue, like he says that, this Mu'tarid, this objector who says this is out of his mind, and so on and so on. He's been quite harsh in his tone if you read his introduction, because he's refuting, he doesn't name him, but it's Imam Bukhari because he's talking about the conditions of the Sahih. But Imam Bukhari's conditions were good. He did have, he'd raised the bar. One could argue because he raised the bar, he got a lot of envy. He basically said, like, for a Sahih Hadith, the standards were that if you, for example, if you transmit from, let's say Ibi is transmitting from Ustad Atif here now. So the thing is, if you just said, you see in Arabic they use this term an, right, which can have many translations. Sometimes it means from, sometimes it means on. It can mean many things. It comes as with many verbs. But so if you just say an Atif, now that just means like from, like you've presumably heard it from. But it could be that you never heard it from him, but you've just heard that he used to say this. So you're just saying, oh, from this guy, like, or on the authority of this guy, this is what's said. Now, in certain hadith, they declare it. They say, haddathana, like he told me. Now, most hadith never have that. Like they do, but if you take the majority of hadith, don't. The majority of the hadith are just going to be an-ana, like an fulan, an fulan, an fulan. Most of them. There's going to be many that do have haddathana and akhbarana and all this as well. I'm not saying there ain't, but most are just like this. Now, most muhaddithin just had a rule that so long as you're contemporaries and you're reliable, that's considered a connected chain. Imam Bukhari kind of raised it and he kind of took it a notch higher, and he said, no, you must, if not in this narration, but in some narration, you must have declared that I've heard from him. So even if it's in a different, so long as you in a different event are saying, oh, I heard Atif say this, it's something totally different, but I know, oh, you've actually met this person then. So now I can, it's still, I'm not 100% sure whether you heard this thing, but I've got some firmer ground to stand on. So this was the whole thing why Imam Bukhari kind of raised the thing, and there could have been envy, I accept all of. Anyway, to kind of move on, the point was that because of his struggles in his last years, people weren't transmitting the book from him. He dies. The only person who transmits the book from him, who we have all these narrations go back to, is one person called Frabri. Now Frabri is a bit problematic because he was not Imam Bukhari's kind of rated student at all. At all. And this is, everything else is just engineered. People start saying Imam Frabri. Well, okay, I suppose if you just want to call anybody an Imam who has an attachment to Hadith, fine. But if you're making out as though he's some kind of legendary, epic Imam, he wasn't. He's unknown of. I mean, he's unknown. Like nobody. Who is Frabri? Because this is the question. That who is Frabri? Because in his lifetime, no major scholar of Hadith ever vouched for him. And it was a tradition to be vouched for. Even though they knew of him. And there's this famous statement, and some people try to refute me by saying, oh, there's a famous statement. And that statement was actually a refutation of them. The famous statement says, Imam Bukhari, Frabri is saying. Dhahabi even quotes this. But it's so absurd and so stupid that even Dhahabi tries to kind of say, apologize for it. Because it's so stupid that he says, oh, there used to be 90,000 students of Imam Bukhari. They used to all come and I used to go. And Alhamdulillah, Frabri saying, Alhamdulillah, none of them are alive today to transmit Bukhari. Or none of them today continue to transmit it except me. Like I'm the only one left. And you think, well, huh? Well, there were many students that died after him, after Frabri, that Imam Bukhari had. And Frabri isn't even acknowledged. Nobody even acknowledges him. Like none of the great muhaddithin say, oh, he's a thiqah. He's trustworthy. The people that do say that come, if you're going to be honest, they come hundreds of years later. But the one that they try to use is Sam'ani, who comes up over 100 years later. But even Sam'ani, I've said there was a problem. Sam'ani allegedly said, oh, Frabri is a thiqah, is reliable. First of all, he'd never met Frabri. He'd probably never met anybody who'd met Frabri. Like if I told you, can you talk about somebody in 1919 in World War I? This is his name. Talk about him. I mean, come on. Like when World War I was going on, how many people do you know that directly know somebody that was alive then? So chances are you don't. So I mean, so him, first of all, Sam'ani saying, yeah, I give him the go ahead. Question is, तेरे कहने से क्या होता है? We need somebody that actually knew him. So, you can say anything. I mean, with all due respect. But there was question marks on Sam'ani as well, because Sam'ani allegedly says this in his book. But then Sam'ani's son, Abu Sa'd al-Sam'ani, who has a book on Ansab, who then is quoting, when he mentions Frabri in his book, this is the son of the father who's allegedly said Frabri is reliable. His son, when he mentions Frabri, doesn't mention his father having vouched for him, whereas for other people he does. So there's a question, and some people said in that Sam'ani's book, the father's book, that it was missing in some manuscripts. So was this an interpolation that some people had put in later on, or was it? I mean, we don't know, but it's definitely questionable. And even if we give it, even if it's a given, it's still doubtful because it's over 100 years later. Then the question was that Frabri himself, his own students, he has like many students, but he has like 6 popular ones and 3 who are the prime students. Now, his main student, who's Abu Ishaq al-Mustamli, he openly says that our teacher's book, his copy of Bukhari was incomplete. And then he himself says, oh, by the way, his chapter headings and things were all over the place, so we used to move them around. We used to put hadith in this chapter, and we used to change chapter headings, and we used to do... So, and people have accepted his statement as a valid statement. Abaji accepted it, Ibn Hajar accepted it. So there's a lot of hands at play here, moving things around. I'm not saying they're evil, but it's human error. The manuscripts differ. If you look at their hadith, the students transmitting it, they've got different versions, they've got different chains. There's hundreds missing in different narrations. Even like the narration that Ibn Hajar relies on isn't the one we've got today. There's at least a few hundred missing in the one that, you know, or variation between the one we've got. And so my point was that this whole thing, and there was more things I kind of gave to the Bukhari Gate, like I spoke about this great Unini's great project, this scholar who emerges in about like the 7th century kind of thing. He is commissioned to kind of collect Sahih Bukhari and correct all the mistakes in it. And he has this great project, and he takes help from grammarians, like Ibn Malik is a good friend of his, the famous grammarian. And the point was that he does this and he corrects it. My first question was, what on earth was he correcting if everything was already so correct? But okay, let's roll with that he corrected it. So his corrected version becomes, you know, the version. But then we don't even have his manuscript. His manuscript is lost. We have a copy of his manuscript. How do you know the person copying didn't make mistakes?
Didn't make mistakes, yeah.
So my point is, these are thousands of hadith. So with this in mind, I just left some question mark. I did not say the conclusion was not pick up Sahih Bukhari, throw it in the bin. It was never that, and I've never said that. And the conclusion was not disrespect Sahih Bukhari. The question was not. My point was, my conclusion was simply that if we find something in there that contradicts with reason, or it contradicts with the Quran, it clashes with the Quran, or with the established Sunnah, the character of the Prophet that we know, then we must discard it. That thing, that's been my...
How do you contrast that with Muwatta, for example? Wouldn't the same problems or similar problems?
Yeah, they could be, but the issue with... Okay, the thing was, first of all, people don't raise the Muwatta up there, which personally I think they should raise it above Bukhari, but they don't, unfortunately. Secondly, Muwatta doesn't have that many hadith in it, so it doesn't have that many problems. So you have Imam Malik, even in his most like copious kind of edition version, probably has about 1900 hadith. Whereas if you look at Imam Bukhari's, around 7,700 approximately, give or take. So you're looking at, there's a huge difference. Secondly, Imam Malik himself, and thirdly, this is the greatest point. In the Muwatta of Imam Malik, and this is why I give this preference, Imam Malik himself teaches you to reject hadith. So he'll bring a hadith that's absolutely sahih, and he'll say, by the way, I don't know what this hadith's on about, we don't go by it. He's teaching you to reject and to accept. So whether, like, he's giving you tools, now Imam Bukhari isn't doing it. Imam Bukhari is kind of giving you as though this is it, take it, you know, I've done. But then we don't even know if this is his book entirely.
But that's the thing, you can't attribute that back to Imam Bukhari, can you? Because
Not
we
with
don't know that in
nowhere
its
near
entirety,
100%, yeah.
That is 100% the content that Imam
100%,
Bukhari
yeah.
compiled.
And they can't all be. So, for example, we've got variations. So they can't all be the versions of Imam Bukhari. Some must definitely have discrepancies.
Yeah.
So that's in a nutshell, you know, the whole thing
One
summarized.
quick question you might want to conclude on this is that if, from the argument that you've given, you know, when was its popularity fueled and how was it fueled? Because then if you have the contemporaries, which I guess, you know, at that point, far more renowned than Bukhari was, what happened to their hadith?
That's a very good question. What is it that kind of, and these are, by the way, I wish people would do research on these kind of questions, but unfortunately we don't have a culture in the Muslim world to really give this so much importance. I feel that Imam Bukhari's thing definitely in his time wasn't. In the years that followed, like the generations that came, it definitely was amongst the competing kind of books. So there were other books like Muslim's book, Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, and other people. Like, so they would have had books who kind of like disappeared. So they didn't get kind of further, like they lost popularity. Now, it seems that despite, you see, the early muhaddithin still seem quite critical, like they're not shy in criticizing Bukhari. So, for example, you'll have Darqutni, who comes probably, you know, you could say almost 100 years after, or around that, you know, he's in the following century, where he openly criticizes several hadith in Bukhari, around 200 hadith, and he's not shy about that. You have other scholars that come, they criticize Bukhari's Sahih, they're not shy about it. But there seems to, along the way, develop a culture where it becomes enshrined with this sanctity that nobody can touch it. I feel, I could be wrong, but I feel that that begins with like Ibn Salah. But this would need a lot more research to see is that, because Ibn Salah is this personality or this character. He's a Shafi'i who's around the kind of 600s. What he does is he tries to crystallize the science of hadith. So his book in Usul Hadith, his kind of Muqaddimah, and he has this like a book on explaining the different types of hadith. Everybody who comes after him just relies on his book. They've either summarized his book or versified it or given commentaries to everything. Is just, he is like the Copernican moment in Usul Hadith. So, and Ibn Salah seems to really give this maqam to Sahih Bukhari, the Sahihain. And he feels that Sahihain almost are like qat'i, that these are what the ummah have accepted now. So ما تلقته الأمة بالقبول. The ummah has accepted this, so we should submit. And then the person who kind of cements it further and just puts the icing on it is Ibn Hajar. Ibn Hajar really seals the deal. After Ibn Hajar, nobody is questioning Sahih Bukhari at all. Ibn Hajar really kind of gives this culture a huge shift, a huge boost, a nitro boost, this culture of mutawatir, this culture of Sahihain, this culture of... and he obviously, he was very passionate about hadith. I get that. Ibn Hajar I do like him. It's not that I don't like him, but I just feel that these individuals had such an impact on the rest of the Muslim world, like subconsciously. Like let's say the Hanafis used to always diss the Shafi'is, and vice versa. Like they would say, "Oh, we're superior," and they would say, "We're superior," and blah blah blah. They have this thing, but the Shafi'is always had this kind of like textualist approach. That it's always the hadith, like it's the letter of the law. It's not the spirit of the law. It's like it's always like that. And the Maliki is the same thing. They kind of had a supremacist ideology, if you like, that we're superior, and it's not about the letter of the law. It's all about maslahah, welfare. And Imam Malik saying, "Oh yeah, you can leave this hadith, you can leave that hadith." All this kind of mentality. But you see, around the time of Ibn Salah and Ibn Hajar and all those other muhaddithin that come along al-Iraqi and all these people that solidify this concept in similar times, these Shafi'is, they're all Shafi'is. What happens is what some modern scholars, I do like what Dr. Sherman Jackson as well, he terms the Shafi'ization of the other schools takes place. So at a subconscious level, they become... like they're arguing against something. Like if you keep saying... So it's like the way the Salafis started bashing everybody with Sahih Bukhari, like a few generations... I mean, not generations, a few decades ago. Like about, let's say in the 90s, it became a big thing. Oh, this is in Sahih Bukhari, this is in Sahih Bukhari. So then what the other madhabs try to do is try to also prove, oh no, our evidence is also in Bukhari. Look, we're also using Bukhari. Because what happens is when you set the benchmark, I kind of have to justify myself through that benchmark. So I start using it too. Like, so all of a sudden, the madhabs in the last 2 decades have done all these works to show hadith. Look, Maliki madhab, look, we're using Bukhari. Hanafi madhab has tried to say, look, this is also in Sahih Muslim, it's in Sahih Bukhari. This. So a similar thing happened back then, that these madhabs started, because they were so kind of rivaling the Shafi'is on Sahih Hadith, they kind of embodied that thing. And they started turning their madhab into another version of... But that's a different, longer discussion, I guess, for another day. But cool. I hope that helps. Go on then. So, and then I'll just take...
to that.
Yeah, of course you can add to it. Flip the camera and...
Doesn't that contradict?
You got a pen and pad.
I don't mean, I'm not accusing the scholars of lying.
No,
but for example, Sheikh Riyadullah is...
He said... We're going to get some hitmen now. I did not say that. Prabhu, हमें क्षमा कीजिए. इस गुस्ताख को उल्टा लटकाया जाए.
He said, I learned the whole of Bukhari from this sheikh going back to Farabri. Now you're saying Farabri's copy is incomplete, and his students playing around with it. Yet Sheikh Riyadullah is saying that I've learned the whole of Bukhari from this sheikh going back to Farabri. So is there a contradiction?
No, they have a chain. I have a chain that goes back to
But
Imam
that,
Tabari,
he's saying
but
that my chain proves that they've learned the whole of Bukhari, unless the contradicts yours.
No,
they
no.
prove
So the thing is, there's a different thing in isnad. Like I have a chain. Like so, my teacher who learned from him, who learned from him, who learned from him. But what did they learn? Like this is the question. Like we don't know exactly what they learned. We just know that it's called Sahih Bukhari. But so for example, the books the Sahih Bukhari today is based on the manuscript called the Sultaniya from Sultan Abdul Hamid II's time. He had a bunch of scholars from Al-Azhar do some work and create a manuscript. So today's Sahih Bukhari is pretty much based on that. We don't have one that goes directly back to Farabri as in with manuscripts. Like we might have, like so for example, imagine you said, like I don't know, let's say I haven't read any of the Harry Potter books, but let's say you've said you read a particular Harry Potter book. Now he says he read a Harry Potter book and he read a Harry Potter book, and now Harry Potter books, the original, the author, the manuscripts are missing. And the other versions that we have, they slightly differ. Like in this one, there's another extra chapter, and this one has this along the way. And by the time it gets to you, there's a universal copy that everybody has. Now, when he's saying that, oh, I've read Harry Potter too, was that the exact same one that you read, or was yours different slightly? That nobody can tell. But they can just say, yeah, you read it as well. What was it? We know it was more or less similar, but was it exact? Did he have an extra chapter? Did he have this missing? Did he have... That's the issue. And I'm not trying to dismiss any of the scholars or anything, but most people are not clued up on this. This whole manuscript thing. When I spoke to people, most of them, scholars I don't mean regular people, they don't have a clue. This is why none of them... first of all, answering my thing rested on the manuscript discrepancy, and it rested on obviously blasphemies in Sahih Bukhari, and it rested on Farabri, you can't authenticate him. They didn't even know about this authentication thing because I think it just blew their mind.
Even muhaddithi, like in Morocco,
because it's not nobody can, because it's not done. Like as in nobody vouched for him, so even if you want to vouch for how
make something up or anything, they didn't have any answer.
No, so on this point, so for example, the blasphemies that I said in Bukhari, they can answer, like as in, they can provide an explanation. So I said, look, this disrespects the Prophet. Like the Prophet saying to a woman, give yourself to me, and then trying to touch her and things like this. It's in Sahih Bukhari. This is obviously nonsense. It goes against the character of the Prophet. So they'll try and interpret, no, maybe he was doing this. No, he didn't maybe mean to grab her like that. Maybe he was trying to touch her like this. Oh, he was already married to her. But then it doesn't make sense because they say when he said give yourself to me, they say, oh, by give yourself, he meant marry me. So if he's asking to marry, then that means she's not married to him. And then why is he trying to touch her? So these kind of things are, I said, blasphemous and mistakes. They should be accepted as that. So these things they can try to explain. They can try to explain those. I'm not saying they can't try to explain. They can. I'm not happy with the explanation, but they can explain them. The discrepancies, they can a very poor job of explaining. They've just said, they've tried to lie, like say, oh, the discrepancies ain't huge. They just, oh, here's the name is Amr and there the name is Omar. No, it isn't. Stop lying, right? The entire chain's bloody different. The hadith are missing. Hundreds of hadith are missing. They've got like complete variation. It's not like, don't like at least be honest about the argument and then explain it. So on this, they've given a very poor, half-hearted answer. As to authenticating Farabri, nobody can do it. Because how can you do it? Because he wasn't authentic. It's like saying, if Einstein didn't publish a particular book, how can you now make him have published it? Obviously, if Farabri is dead, the people around him are dead in his time. So we can't make somebody vouch for him now. So nobody vouched for him. So they're all dead. That ship has long sailed. So what can you do? So they're utterly stuck on that one. So that was, and most people probably didn't even know that Farabri wasn't vouched for until it started to become a bit of a big deal. And then when they looked into it, they probably got a bit surprised. So, yeah.
Just to move on, it's not that.
Yeah, sure, let's move on. That's enough of Bukhari Gate people.
I was going to ask. Sorry, just a side note on that. Did you mention that Bukhari wrote Tariq al-Kabir with the chains and stuff?
Did it have the chains?
Yeah, is that what you said, that Bukhari authored Tariq al-Kabir and have chains and narrators, yeah? Am I correct?
Yeah, he does have, like, he speaks about the narrators and everything.
And that's widely accepted.
No. Tariq al-Kabir was like when he wrote it, he was unique. People hadn't really written biographies like a dictionary of narrators the way he did. So his book really took off. So one of the interesting thing is when Imam Bukhari kind of in his final days, when he's about to pass, he spends he travels and he ends up staying with somebody. Seeks lodging with this person, and the guy's name is I think it's Ibn Faris al-Dallal or something, right? So this person then transmits from Bukhari, but he transmits the Tariq al-Kabir. He doesn't transmit his Sahih.
But doesn't Tariq al-Kabir have its own issues with Ibn Sa'd and al-Waqidi and
Have what, sorry? Isnad issues.
Yeah, Ibn Sa'd and al-Waqidi and Hisham al-Kalbi saying about the scribes.
If I knew you were going to come prepared, I wouldn't have blacked. Can we delete this? Quick! Burn the place down, let's go. No, what do you mean it has issues with, like as in they're problematic?
Yeah.
Narrators, as in he's got them in there? Yeah, it doesn't, no, I don't mean, you see, everybody who Bukhari has vouched for, are they credible? That's a different discussion. I totally agree that they're not credible. There's many people, because there's people that Imam Bukhari has accepted who other people have said are da'if. Abu Zur'a al-Razi has said da'if. Abu Hatim al-Razi has said is da'if. Many people, Nasa'i has problematized several people that Bukhari transmits from. Bukhari transmits from certain people who were hardline Kharijis. They were Khawarij, like hardline, like basically like today's version of ISIS, but on steroids, like that. So, yet Bukhari has no problem transmitting from them. Other scholars are like, what the hell? How are you transmitting from these people? These people are like butchers. And so, but yet, so I'm not saying I agree with his list of, even those people didn't all agree necessarily with the content, but they liked the book. Like they thought, wow, that's a unique composition that you've done here with the, the dictionary of names, the way you did it. So they were impressed with it. I don't think they were kind of saying, oh, this is supreme, but they just rated it. They did like it. That's what I meant by it. So my key point there was, even in his last days, the guy who he stays with decides to take his Tariq al-Kabir and put his name to it, but doesn't take his Sahih. So that guy doesn't transmit his Sahih. But think about it, this is in the last days of Imam Bukhari, and he still doesn't, take that. He takes his Tariq al-Kabir though, and he's one of the main transmitters of that. But yeah, moving on, I mean, that's enough of Bukhari.
And then we'll come to
Yeah.
I was going to go to
نعم.
question about al-usul al-thalatha by Imam Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab al-Tamimi.
Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, Sheikh Najd.
So like,
I kind of feel impure saying his name. यार सब एक बार वुजू कर लें.
So like, what are your thoughts on, if you've read it, what are your thoughts on that text? And like, let's say like,
I don't mean in any promiscuous sense. I don't mean like he broke my wudu by hearing his name. I meant like for further sanctification, just in case people.
It's clearly a delayed response here.
Yeah, sorry.
just like thoughts on the text, and like in particular like religious institutions like in Medina and things like that. Like, let's say you go to study, you're going to go to study, but people are going to ask you about your aqidah and things like that. So when you study these kind of texts, how do you critically analyze like what actually came from the Salaf? Because of course these guys are going to put Ibn Taymiyyah, Al-Albani, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Baz, and these kind of things. But how can you check if what's being said, like about Asma al-Sifat or whatever, is actually can be proven like
Qat'an. Allah. Allah. Everybody wants yaqeen today.
So how do you critically analyze creed, and what are your thoughts on that particular text?
Okay. So the question, in case people didn't hear it, is by Muti'. In case you want to get back to him, people, for criticizing Al-Sheikh and the Sheikh. Right, so is Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab,
Tamimi.
At-Tamimi. Allah, Allah. What is it? وَإِزُّ النَّاسِ تَمَّ إِلَى تَمِيمِ. The Bani Tamim. A great tribe amongst the Arabs. Right, but anyway, and they're also going to be the supporters of the Dajjal according to the hadith, isn't it? Or my- but relax, because all the hadith about the Dajjal are made up. We've got some good news and bad news. Right, so the thing is, right, now so he has a book amongst many books called Usul al-Thalatha to do with creed. And what do I think of it? I mean, I'm not really impressed by Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab's books at all. I mean, who would be? They're very basic and very kind of a bit, in their way, a bit very dogmatic, very kind of. They're very simple books. I mean, they're not. I'm not saying he hasn't written anything. I haven't read all of his things. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I've read all his things. I'm not like a fan of his like that or anything. But you can see his Kitab al-Tawheed, and you can see this Usul al-Thalatha and all these. I don't see what these things are really about. The three major. It's like a bit like the Trinity, isn't it? The three Usul al-Thalatha. The three things that they want to teach you, and Asma wa Sifat, and they want to go through the whole, the way they do taqseem of this is how we understand God through His rububiyyah and His uluhi. I remember when I first came across this stuff many years ago, I was like, what the hell are they? They used to ask, do you know about Allah's rububiyyah and His uluhiyyah? And I'm thinking, do you know His tawheed? So I was like, tawheed, okay, I understood tawheed, yeah. No, but Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. And you're like, what the hell is that? Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. I mean, look, this stuff, I think Ibn Taymiyyah.
Can it be proven from the Salaf? Like,
of course, none of this is from the Salaf.
Not even Imam Malik?
None of this is from the Salaf. They I'll debate any Salafi. Any Salafi, al-Hadith. So long as he's a scholar, he's learned, not just people to waste my time.
Medina and stuff.
Wherever. But he's learned. Like, I don't just want, just waste my time. I mean, I'd rather be watching TV than wasting my time just talking to him. But if, so long as he's studied, I'll debate him on this. Prove it to me from the Quran wa Sunnah. I've had this discussion with so many Salaf. Only Quran wa Sunnah. Never can do it. Never. Can't prove any of this sifat thing. How can you prove it from the Quran? It's not in the Quran. Do you think the Prophet taught people to believe like this? Of course he didn't. Who of the Salaf ever taught, Imam Malik ever speak like this? Guys, by the way, we got to believe like this about God. Never. We don't have anything about creed from the Salaf. Generally, I mean, we have the fact that they believed in one God. I don't mean like bare essentials, like absolute. Stuff, yeah. So this is why I've said to people, when it comes to belief, you just say, Amantu billahi wa malaikati. I believe in Allah, His angels, His messengers. I believe that there's been revelation. I believe that there will be an afterlife, like this is and everything, and that Allah is all in control of everything, and khalas, that's it. There's nothing really more. That's all the Prophet taught. Everything else people put in, and they put it in, we're talking like almost 300 years after the Prophet. Almost, give and take. Give or take. So, it's a bit like the Nicene church kind of thing. So you've got, where does all this kalam and all this creed and all this come from? Where? It doesn't come from the Sahaba. It doesn't come from, they never spoke about. And this, Allah can only see through his kind of attribute. And what the hell are these? Ibn Rushd, the Maliki, he tore this to pieces. He said, what on earth?
At that time as well, like making that same argument, like during the time of Ibn Rushd.
There were what? Sorry?
Atharis,
Oh yes, so the Atharis today, who they call Atharis or the Salafis, were historically called Hanbalis in Aqidah, right? So in the past, you had them; they were just called Hanbalis. So Ibn Taymiyyah would never have called himself an Athari; he would call himself a Hanbali in Aqidah.
Really?
Yeah, of course. So in fact, Ibn Taymiyyah had the argument against him that when he was charged with these crimes or whatever, I don't believe in. By the way, I disagree with that. I disagree with. Them imprisoning Imam Ibn Taymiyyah. Chalo, Imam. So I disagree with them imprisoning him for having a voice. Yeah. Even though I disagree with what he had to say, but to shut people up like that by throwing them in prison, because It's just envy, it's just jealousy, it's just, you know, if you can't shut somebody up with arguments, then you should just shut up. You know, like if I can't talk to you, that isn't the way to say lock him up. So I disagree with that. But that said, one of the things they'd said to him was, look, we have no problem with you believing this, just say it's Hanbali. He was saying that no, this is Ahl Sunnah and you guys are out of Ahl Sunnah. This is what caused the kind of the rift. I mean, I'm sure there were other issues, but this was the apparent issue that they used as a pretext. So, I mean, this Aqidah has been around as the Hanbali Aqidah. They date it back to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Other Sunnis say that, nah, we don't believe it was him, we believe it's falsely attributed to him.
What did the Malikis, what's your stance on the correct Aqidah then?
See, this is it. I'll tell you something which is quite ironic actually. And that is that Islam is, in essence, a faith. So it's come to do with believing. This is what Islam is in essence about believing. Yet nobody told us at all what to believe in for almost 200 years. It's ironic, isn't it? It's like nobody actually mentioned, like they mentioned thousands and thousands of masail in fiqh. So Imam Malik's Mudawwana has at least about 30,000 masail. Imam Abu Hanifa's Zahir al-Riwayah has about 100,000 masail of fiqh. You know, should I rent? Or I've got this, it's at the end of this month and that month. Or we use this container, I bought this transaction, I want a refund, I want this. I bought 2 camels, but one was like this, and I've got these grains, and I've got this, and I've got... And they go into so much detail. But nobody actually taught what to believe. Nobody. Which is strange. I do find that strange, to be fair, but it's interesting as well because it goes to show what they started to do was they started to say along the way, okay, we don't believe that though. So that's what. So for example, when the Khawarij emerged, the Khawarij were the first major kind of split. Yeah. So they started to say, okay, we don't believe that by committing sins you're a kafir. But they never said what we do believe. They just said, but we don't believe that. When the Shia became prominent, and especially those Shia that started to, let's say, curse, for example, or even if the Shia didn't curse, let's say the Shia giving preference to Ali, they started to say, but really, in all honesty, this caliphate issue, is it even a belief issue? I mean, today people will say it is, but is it? I mean, this is a historical issue. I understand it's to do with legitimacy and honouring. And I am obviously Sunni. I do agree in the order that it went. I mean, I honour the order. I accept that there was a difference of opinion even amongst the Sahaba between Uthman and Ali, as in who should have gone first or whatever. But generally, Abu Bakr being first, Umar being second, these kind of things I definitely agree with. Hence, even Imam Abu Hanifa, what they attribute to, he didn't say the whole order. He said, "Ufaddilu shaykhain." I give the 2 sheikhs absolute precedence, Abu Bakr and Umar. And then because they acknowledged that there was a bit of difference amongst the others. But my point is it really a belief issue? As in, did God, before creating the worlds, think, okay, I think everybody should believe that this was the order of the caliphal structure? No, I mean, that's not really. But chalo, whatever politics, I accept. So they started to say, okay, we don't believe in cursing the Sahaba. Fine, okay. So they started to identify with what we're not. Yet, what are we?
So
they didn't say.
Someone asked me, let's say if I go to Medina, someone asked me, oh, what's your Aqidah? Should I just tell them, I'm to build
Oh, yeah, they'll definitely let you in. See, today, nobody really understands. So for example, the term Sunni, as in Ahl Sunnah, in all honesty, didn't exist till probably about 200-300 years probably after the Prophet existed. Probably around that time, yeah. Maybe about 200 to 300 in between. So in Imam Malik's time, he would never have used the word we are Sunni or Ahl Sunnah. Because the Ahl Sunnah didn't, unless they were using it in a different context to mean Sunnah meaning hadith or the teaching. But today Ahl Sunnah means the orthodoxy of Islam.
Even within Ahl Sunnah there's a split. Who's Ahl Sunnah really?
Yeah, I mean, there is that split, but I mean, when did this word even start to get emerge that we are Ahl Sunnah? So people say it began with Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, which it may have, or it began after him, but then maybe by the 300s it's definitely there. But was it there in the time of Imam Abu Hanifa? No. Definitely wasn't. They would have just said we are Muslims. That's it. But we are the main. They would have probably said we're the main body of Muslims. And it's an interesting discussion that how did this orthodoxy form? And I like what Dr. Umar Abdullah has a whole series on this, the four schools and things like this, and or is it in his Aqidah one, which is about it's about 14 lectures or something. But in there he speaks about this study of hadith became a trait by which the proto-Sunnis, if we can call them that, like the Salaf, began to identify as a movement. Like, we are the orthodoxy. And how do you know you're the orthodoxy? You study hadith. So hence Abu Hanifa had a hard time being transparent as the orthodoxy, because he wasn't really committed to studying hadith. So the orthodoxy, you find them that they started, and it just became like a trend. And I think that's George Maqdisi in his book of I think George Maqdisi in his Rise of Islamic Colleges, whatever, speaks about this, or in one of his books about how did the Sunni mainstream become identified as the Sunni mainstream. So I think it began with this, like this is our trait, we study hadith. And then they rivaled each other, obviously, for supremacy. I had some very deep questions going on today, Yadi.
Do you want to ask your question?
Chat. Yes.
So Sheikh al-Qawm. Terminology at the time of Imam Bukhari, etc., when we say books of hadith.
Yeah.
The printing press came about in the 1400s.
Yeah.
So did we look to have the odd one or two manuscripts at the time?
Yeah. So what they had was they had papyrus and things like that. Like parchment, which they would write on. So a kind of paper. Paper had formed, that papyrus kind of paper, definitely by their time, because it's in the Abbasids' time that paper becomes, I mean, that version, I'm not saying it's the A4 kind of paper today, but that version of paper is made available, which allows the Bayt al-Hikmah in Baghdad and these places to do mass translation of the Greek works, because the Muslims are using paper and other people ain't. And they start to import a lot. They call it kaghid, actually, which from the Farsi, we still in Urdu call it kaghaz, same kind of thing. So this thing did exist, like the papyri kind of documents. It was there, and they used to. So if you read, like I've read some of the classical in their works, which are really old, saying that one volume would, like one sifr, would have usually 20 pages. So they had like a system, and this is going very old. So I'm reading from people like 900 years ago, saying that this is how books are organized. Like one sifr, one kind of set small bounded thing has 20 pages, and then we have so many like that. That's how they do them. So they did have books and things. So, but I mean, they're not as neat as our books today, but they did have,
What's up to the question online? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you touched upon the political order of Hazrat Usman, Zanana and Hazrat Ali. Would you agree that political, I guess, agenda, you can say, down the line has fragmented the original orthodox belief? Because now we do have those split, the Shia and the Sunni, and there are some fundamental differences. But if you go by the whole political, I guess, argument, you could say that it wasn't at that time, but now obviously it has. It's inevitable.
बाद में दम तो है. You see, the thing is, to really understand it, we gotta zoom out. Okay, to really understand it, if you want to just at that level, we're too zoomed in, it's too close, and we're just emotional. Like, I mean, I personally do believe that, look, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu an was one of the greatest Sahaba, and I do personally believe that if I was just going by merits, he would. No. That's usually Nav doing that for us. He interrupts there. No. Right. So if I was just going by meritocracy, I would personally believe that Sayyidina Ali was above Sayyidina Uthman. That's just a personal choice by meritocracy. But I disagree with personally the whole Shia way of looking at things, like treating like every companion can be criticized except Sayyidina Ali. So I don't understand that logic either. But that said, this is just an emotional thing at that scale, You know, like we're too zoomed in. We got to zoom out. See, when you zoom out, you realize that you're zooming out with not just space but time. Space-time, people, Einstein speak, right? So we're zooming out. This goes way predates the Prophet. Okay. You see, Mecca, by the way, I think this is a discussion for another day. Mecca wasn't most likely the thriving kind of city and everything that we assume, but it was definitely a town trying to get its kind of place, as in they were trying to be recognized. They had a Kaaba. The people, Quraysh, obviously, who feel honor this Kaaba, really are embodied by, you've got two main strands that come through them. The main strand that seems to be like the kind of, I don't know, like the Chaudhries, if you want to say, of that age, like they think, is the Bani Umayyah. Right, this person, Umayyah, his kind of offspring seem to hold that role. They seem to be like the kind of like the daddies and the dons of that Mecca, whatever it is, although it's quite a small town, but they still seem to hold that role. You seem to find that it's through their offspring. So Harb, who's the father of Abu Sufyan, so through this lineage you get, like, from them you're going to get Harb, you'll get Abu Sufyan, you'll get Muawiyah. Uthman is also from Bani Umayyah. All these people are from Bani Umayyah. But let's say now Harb, who's the father of Abu Sufyan, one of his close associates is one of the first people to introduce writing, the way we know writing today, into Mecca. They call it the Jazm script. The Arabs actually had an ancient script, which is not the current day script. They used to call that Musnad al-Khat al-Himyari. Now, it's today called South Arabian script, and it looks a bit like hieroglyphics. The Quran and the Arabic we have today was a kind of modern Arabic that they seem to be importing around the time of the Prophet, when the Prophet's young and growing up. Maybe he's not that young, he's probably a young man, but he's not a prophet yet. So he's around that age. So you get people like Harb has this associate who comes, who brings, he learns it from further north. This was in essence the Nabatean script that the Arabs then adopt. He marries that guy to his own daughter, who's the sister of Abu Sufyan, and so obviously makes this guy family. So you can see that they are bringing in writing to Mecca, into the Hijaz, that part of Hijaz. They obviously consider themselves to be like we are it. Hashim, it may seem that Banu Hashim may have been involved in setting up the kind of trade contracts. He may have had some deal in that. And so there's always been this competition, who controls the haram, who's the big guy here between these. So initially when the Prophet comes out with the message, if you read some of the ancient poetry of what the Meccans say, they seem to be saying that this is just the Hashim, Bani Hashim, trying to do something to gain popularity. Now initially the Meccans never accept it because they don't see Hashim above them. But when the Prophet migrates to Medina and then Islam kind of spreads to other tribes, now Hashim are not seen as just Hashim, they're seen as Quraysh. And Umayyah also Quraysh. So it's like imagine now, like let's say, I don't know, let's say most people here are Pakistan, I don't know, they're not all, but let's just give an example, like let's say we're Pakistani. But we've got different, like some people could be Pakhtun, some people could be, we're from, let's say Azad Kashmir, some people from different, and we could have, let's just say people have rivalries, like issues, like I don't mean like they have to be bloody rivalries, but they could always, maybe they look, they see that person contemptuously, but imagine for some reason, like let's say Abu Muawiyah there rises with a thing, and because we say, oh, he's a Pathan, we're not Pathan, so, we're not going to give this, this is just a thing some Pathans have come up with, oh, it's crazy. But all of a sudden, let's say this thing takes off in the UK, but the rest of the UK see it as a Pakistani thing. So we now also start to take pride in it because we are also Pakistani. So in that way, this is what seems to have happened. So because Quraysh got given precedence because of the Prophet, so Bani Umayyah also are Quraysh. So hence they kind of give in to the whole message as well. They embrace Islam. They become part of it because Quraysh now is, the Prophet said, Al-A'immatu min Quraysh, the Imams will be from Quraysh. So later on, the thing is that, you see, this, when you look at who starts to set up structural powers throughout the Muslim world, like Muawiyah in the time of Umar radiallahu an is placed as a governor in Sham. I think he replaces his brother first, but he becomes the governor. He actually stabilizes Sham and has a very strong, loyal following and does a lot of work there. Now, in Uthman's time, many other people, because the kingdom grew so vast, who do you place in charge of money? People you trust. Who do you trust? He trusts family. So he starts to place, family who? Bani Umayyah in all these places. Now that kind of thing starts to kindle again, that these people have returned to power. Now the thing was in Ali's time, when he vied for it, or rose for let's say, for leadership, it triggered that Hashim versus Umayyah again. But Umayyah, as they were before, but now they were an incredibly powerful force. Like, they were actually very powerful. And Islam had become recognized as a Qurayshi thing, and especially an Umayyi thing. Because they were Bani Umayyah, they were the people in charge, like as in powerful positions. So, and Bani Hashim were never seen as, like, in my understanding, they were kind of seen as the Sharif people, in my understanding, like, like the Allah Wale and like that kind of, they weren't seen as the kind of like vicious people or like that kind of, so they were seen as a bit more like holy and nice. But that image doesn't go too well when you're trying to fight against about kingdoms. Yeah. Because, the niceties, everybody likes them, but nobody goes with them. They think, oh, no, I ain't gonna, so this whole thing with Sayyidina Ali and Muawiyah, and to be honest, it wasn't even Sayyidina Ali and Muawiyah. The thing was that it was actually first between Sayyidina Ali and the other companions. I think that, this is my personal opinion, that the reason they seem to put it all on Muawiyah is because he's a softer target than people like Zubayr and other great companions who first fought against Sayyidina Ali. But the point was that after, let's say, all of them have passed, then the Umayyad dynasty starts to kind of, because Muawiyah keeps it in the family, because he's not going to let it go. Let's just be honest, because he even says, see, look, even what they transmit from Muawiyah, even people who don't like Muawiyah, he says that this matter will stay amongst Quraysh. And he says, who are the top potential candidates from Quraysh today? And he says there's only like 4. Like they say possibly 5. There was Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Mm-hmm. There was Abdullah ibn Abbas. This is when he's handing it over to Yazid, his son. There's, you've got Abdullah ibn Zubayr, Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Umar, and you've got, who are we talking about? You've got Hassan, obviously the Prophet's grandson, and you've got Hassan Hussein, but I don't know whether he was considering, I don't think he considered maybe Hussein as a threat. But I think he felt Hassan may have been because he was older. And I think he mentioned, what's his name, Abdurrahman ibn Abu Bakr's son, who actually just dies that year. So he's not a threat. Like, he just dies of natural causes. But he, they say, was actually one of the most hot-headed. So he was actually a huge threat. He's very outspoken, Abu Bakr's son. The other one, not Muhammad, the one who was part of killing Uthman. But this one, Abu Bakr. Abdurrahman, sorry. He just dies that year, natural causes. So you see, Muawiyah says these are the main potentials of Quraysh. Make sure you get them to give you bay'ah. Because this matter will really just stay in Quraysh now. And really Quraysh to them is just Bani Umayyah. And then later on you've got, this is all politics. I mean, it's very fascinating, don't get me wrong. I do enjoy. I just think sometimes you shouldn't get too emotional over these things. They've happened. It's okay to learn. You can get sentimental whilst reading it, but it's not a need for sectarianism or for kind of like going, oh, this person is like, I have to now go and cuss and insult this person who's been long dead, like just to make myself feel better. I think that kind of stuff is nonsense. Yeah, let's take some online questions.
Why would we pray Maghrib straight after, inshallah, to those of you who are asking?
Namaz ke baad? People ask about that.
So Tahir is asking, I know you've answered this before, but just maybe briefly if you want to go over this, about the fire not burning Ibrahim alayhi salam in the Quran. Does that go against science? So he's thrown into the fire and the fire doesn't burn him.
Okay, the fire not burning Ibrahim alayhi salam. Look, see, there's two things I want to say before answering that. I was asked recently about a question as well, and I answered same thing. I've got on YouTube a clip where I speak about, it's titled to do with the Queen of Sheba, but its greater title is how to approach stories in the Quran. Like, how do we approach them? Stories in the Quran, you've got two options. Option one, we just see them as a story, as an example, as a story, that's it. Like, it doesn't matter if they were real or not. It's a story, it's got a moral, and so long as that, they've got what we call narratorial truths, like metaphorical truths. This is option one. In this case, nothing matters what the story is saying, because it's just a story. People could be flying, they could be time traveling, they could be doing anything, they could be rising from the dead, doing this, they could be, whatever, it's just a story. Option two is, no, they were factual, real events. The problem with this lens is, if we're going to say they're real events, we've got to now make sure they are real. Like, they've got to add up. So I personally do go with that they are real, generally speaking. I feel that maybe one or two things may be stories in the Quran, but generally I feel that these things are real. Now, therefore, we've got to then analyze the whole structure, what's being mentioned. The Quran does not generally, I know Surah Yusuf has a lot of detail about Yusuf alayhi salam, but most surahs just mention snippets. They're not like a chronological narrative, like the Prophet is saying, like Allah is saying, and one day, Ibrahim alayhi salam was born, this is the year. A bit like the Bible. If you look at the Bible, the Old Testament, it gives like places, this person was born here, he was the son of this, he was the son of this, he was the son of this, and he did this, and he did this. It goes into so much detail. And one day he was at this, and went across this person, he did this. The Quran's not like that. It just mentions snippets. Like, there'll just be and do you not recall when this happened? Or have they not heard of when and it'll just mention in 2-3 verses, and that's it. Moved on, new story now. So the issue with this, not an issue, but the challenge here is a lot of information is missing. Because Allah is not trying to give you a biographical, like a book on a thing. He's just trying to tell you a lesson from an event. So we have to look at these things carefully. Some people look at these things and they take it like, they kind of try to combine the two. So they want to treat it like just a fantasy story, but they want to say it's real. The problem with that is then it doesn't add up to the real world. If you start saying things like people flying and people doing this and people doing that, but you wouldn't believe that if somebody else said it. Like, so it doesn't add up. Like, if I said to you, look, here's a book, and it says that this person got out of his house and he flew from Birmingham, he just ran and just started flying, and then he landed in Manchester, and then he just time traveled back to 1924, and then he just moved forward to 2056, and like, you'd accept it as a story, but you wouldn't accept it. But I said, no, trust me, this time it just happened. It doesn't normally happen, but it happened this time. So you wouldn't accept these things. So if we look at the Quran, it doesn't actually mention, generally speaking, anything that's so contradictory. The problem is we're filling in the gaps. So if you take the example of Ibrahim alayhi salam's fire story, nowhere does it actually mention he was thrown in the fire. But you see, we fill the dots in. It's a bit like that, it's the blind spot. The brain just fills it in. So you've got now, like Allah says in the Quran, they prepared a fire. That was, they said, let's prepare this really big fire for him or something to burn him. Now, then Allah does mention, we said to the fire, be cool. But it doesn't mention that anywhere that they threw him in. It does mention that Allah says, we saved him from the fire. Now, true, he was saved from the fire. Now, there's different ways of understanding that. One way is he was thrown in the fire and he got saved. Another way is he got saved from it. Like Allah mentions, we saved Noah from the flood. It didn't mean he threw him in the flood first, had him almost drown, and then pulled him out and saved him. Like, it doesn't mean like, the whole point is when you save somebody from something, it means you saved him. It doesn't mean I saved you from getting shot. It means you have to first get shot and then I save you from it. Right? That's one way of saving. The other way, I mean, since it's God, it can be done before. So the point is, now, in this sense, what I've said is that if you look at the verses, if the fire was huge and he was most likely tied up whilst they're making this fire, probably tormenting him, right? It's very likely that the heat and the smoke would damage you still, even if you're not in it yet, but you're close to it. So Allah said, He says, we said to the fire, be cool and not cause harm. Now, how did He say this? Did He so some people could say, we just said, like Allah just said. Or were there means involved? Like in the other verse, Allah says, we said to the skies, let down rain. But we know that obviously rain is obviously in the clouds, it's not like in the sky. It doesn't work like that. It works, but we understand this is how language works. Allah's not trying to give you a scientific breakdown of how it happened. He's just trying to tell you a quick, a snapshot. And it's in that language that we sent down rain from the heavens above. Obviously, rain doesn't actually come from the heavens, it comes from the clouds. But the point is, that's the language. So here when Allah addresses, and we said to the sky, with to do with Nuh alayhi salam, we said to the sky, stop the rain with the flood, and we said to the earth, swallow, the water. But it wasn't there's obviously mechanisms doing it. It wasn't like obviously the soil would absorb, it would absorb the thing. It's not just it's doing it without any mechanism. So when Allah's saying don't harm him, is it just He's saying it, or was there, for example, a mechanism like wind that kept him safe? There's no harm in, Allah doesn't have to mention every detail. The other thing is that if he was thrown in the fire and then pulled out, why didn't the people around him believe? Because Ibrahim alayhi salam is only a young man at this stage. He lives a long life yet after that. So why didn't they just, think about it, if a guy got thrown in a fire and it's a really big fire and it's burned, everybody whoa, but he's just and then he walks out the fire, everybody would be that's definitely a man of God. We're not worthy. Yet they don't. And wouldn't they then at least think, okay, if the fire didn't kill him, at least let's try stabbing him. See if that don't work. So there's no news of them trying to kill him, and neither do they believe in him. So it's more likely that he got saved somehow from the actual fire from going ahead. That's what seems more likely. However, the Quran didn't want us to get fixed on the detail. It was just trying to show a message that Allah is there as a source of help. That's, I think, the important thing.
Sorry, go.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to ask, going back to one of the previous questions, you were saying that you don't like the method of criticizing all the companions, yeah, or looking at people in with a lens, yeah. So obviously going back to the definition of what a companion is, I think it was Ibn Hajar that said the one that saw the Prophet and he died upon the belief.
Or
yeah?
met the Prophet.
Met the Prophet and died upon that belief. So, do you think that in terms of the concept of Adalat al-Sahaba, is it the default position that all of the companions, unless you've seen anything bad from them, they are just and trustworthy?
No, look, if we're going to the Shia slate us Sunnis over this point. And to be fair, we know that they've got a point. If we're going to be honest, they have got a point. They say, come on, as well, the Sahaba were just normal human beings. And we do know that. And their point is that why do you treat them as though they're infallible? And in all honesty, they weren't infallible. And we know that because even in our hadith it mentions there were companions who would drink alcohol, there were companions who were doing things that would get into trouble, who would commit crime. There were people, and then this whole understanding of what do we call a companion is a more interesting thing as well, because it's really, a lot of it seems to be made up later on. in all honesty, I don't think the Prophet, alaykum salam, right? So I don't think the Prophet himself would have considered all those people his companions. Ustad, take care. Right, so I don't, like, in the Prophet's lifetime, who would have he considered to be his companion? He would have considered most likely those people who were often around him. And they would, hence you have the hadith where a companion is asked that, you know, are there any companions alive today? And he says that as to people who met the Prophet, he says maybe there's some. But he says as to his companions, no, they've all died. So I accept that this, using this term like Sahaba, who are the Sahaba, everybody who met the Prophet, is really an institutionalized version. I accept that, if we're going to be honest, you know, just being honest. And I don't really believe personally they are all Sahaba. I just believe that the Sahaba were his true companions, people who were actually with him, not just like people who knew him like that. And you know, I gave the example like saying once, like, oh, imagine it's like in this day and age, and I gave Facebook as an example. I said like, oh, like let's say I do things on Facebook and I've got Facebook friends, so what, like 5,000 whatever friends maxed out. Now, in all honesty, I don't think I hardly, with maybe exception of a few, know any of them probably, like on a genuine level. Maybe those who ask me questions a lot and I kind of interact with them. But otherwise, let's say if somebody said about me in years to come, oh, who were his friends? And somebody said, yeah, he was his friend because he was his Facebook friend. That doesn't really make that your friend in that sense. Friend would have been people that you generally hung around with. You were... So, yeah, so I accept that. And the criticism part, I accept as well, that if, in all honesty, you could criticize. I've answered this before in much detail, saying that how should we approach criticism of the companions? And I've said there's two hallways, two kind of paths. One is where we don't criticize anybody. We just venerate them and we just treat them with respect and we just leave it. And I encourage that. That's what I preach. That's what I advise. I accept it's not objectively accurate. I accept that it's not. It is institutionalized. But I think it works for the better. Because we do kind of then treat them as like superhero, like the halo effect. Everybody's kind of semi-perfect. But that works. The other thing is the other path is one of criticism, where we can be critical. We don't have to be evil, but we can be critical. The issue with this is it's a very, like I mentioned, it's a very dark, scary, lonely path with, you know, with that Halloween music going on in the background, you know, Michael Myers. He's standing behind a tree, and you got that Halloween music going on. It's one of those paths. If you go down this, the problem is that the Sahaba were human, all too human. And then you're going to get into stories, you're going to get into narrations. Narrations are dictated by always people who are partisan to something. So you might read something from somebody who favored this person over that person, therefore he's writing all these horrible things about that person. Now you're going to read about this person over that person. And you start reading all of these things. And like, what does it achieve in the end? So, and then so I do agree that these people could be criticized, like as in, I don't mean criticized as in taking this, like pointing faults with them, but I mean being critical, critiquing, as opposed to criticizing, I suppose. But critiquing them, but then I disagree with the Shia in the sense that they say you can critique the Sahaba. Didn't they critique each other? Which they're right, they did. But then they say you can critique the Sahaba except Ali. And you think, well, why can't you critique Sayyidina Ali then? Because if we're going to critique them, then we should critique them all. Like, like, if you're going to go down that road, then the whole point of it is being uber objective. What's the point of getting there and saying, oh, we're going to rip everybody to shreds, but Sayyidina Ali is ma'soom? You think, well, I doubt that. And then this is why last time I said, you know, a few years back, some of these things and people got really offended online. Said, oh my God, he's critiquing Sayyidina Ali. I wasn't critiquing Sayyidina Ali, but I was just trying to make a point. So that's why I advise not going down that path. This one, first path, yeah. John, dekho, you look around. Haryali, haryali. Spring, nice music, Bollywood tune in the background. Everybody's happy. Everybody's on mushrooms. This is beautiful. This is a beautiful path, this one. So that's why I say just go with this veneration, and no point critiquing them, because it just gets messy, it gets horrible, and there's very little to come out of it except just arguments and sectarianism. And
so Sajid is asking, why are your views different to most scholars? Why do you stand out so much in terms of your views?
Wah. But tell him, Sajid ji, it takes a genius to know a genius. कहाँ पैदा होते हैं ऐसे पारंगंदा तबा लोग, as Mir said. These anoke, unique people. Where, how are they born? Where are they born? अफसोस तुमको मीर से सोहबत नहीं. See, had you met the likes of Mir, you would have known. But yeah, different. Why am I different?
Why your views seem to be different from most others? You seem to stand out a bit.
That's a broad question. Huh? It's not just the views. I think I don't belong to a sect which allows me to, I suppose in the broad sense, I'm Sunni, but if that's what you want to say, I don't consider that a sect, I just consider that Orthodox Islam. Mainstream Islam, whatever you want to call orthodoxy, it is the mainstream. The bulk of Muslims are Sunni in the world. Unanimously, whether you want to say 75%, 70%, 80%, whatever, are Sunni with their disagreements. And I cast everybody in that. Salafi, Sufi, Ash'ari, Maturidi, Hanbali, Athari, whatever, Zahiri, whatever they are, within the Sunni thing, I consider them all to be part of the Sunni. Although I disagree with things, but because I don't belong to a sect, I think it allows me to speak freely, to think about things freely. You see, for me, the argument has to just make sense to me. I don't have to worry about pleasing my group or my cult or my Pir Sahib or my Sheikh or my whole sect. I don't have to worry about pleasing them. They don't exist. So my point is, whereas if I was part of a particular sect, it would be like if I was, let's say, a Deobandi or a Salafi, or in that sense, Salafis are a bit slightly freer than maybe like Deobandis, because they have some freedom to their approach, but they can't still go against their mashayikh in general. Deobandis are unfortunately held to kind of ransom, really, to the held captive to the whole akabirin, of the Deoband thing. And this isn't a criticism of the Deobandis, but this is just me being honest. I love honesty. Honesty. That's what I told the judge. I love honesty. So the thing is that Brailvis as well, but although Brailvis in some way are less structured than the Deobandi, so there's a bit more kind of scattered approach to them, so they've got a bit of differences amongst them, but even then they've got broader kind of structures that they can't go against. Like they can't, so if you followed a particular their Pir Sahib, they couldn't be going against their kind of Pir Sahib, or let's say somebody follows, I don't know, a particular big sheikh, like, and some amongst them, don't get me wrong, were a bit open-minded. Pir Karam Shah Sahib and people like that were quite open-minded. But others are sometimes not that open-minded. So the point is, if you follow a particular sect, you're stuck. You can't do anything. But people, they hero worship. They don't just hero worship, they super... Like, can you imagine trying to go against that? You'd get boycotted. And if that's your world, like imagine I'm, I don't know, like a Deobandi, I only belong to a particular Deobandi masjid, and that's the only masjids I go to, they're the only people I interact with. Or let's say I'm a Sufi with you could, what's a popular tariqah? Let's say
Qadri.
Qadri. No, I mean an actual with a scholar.
Tijani.
Like let's say, but Tijanis I think are a bit, they're not really too fussed about things, ain't they? But it could be Tijani, or let's say like Sheikh Yaqubi is popular, like he's got a lot of murids. Or you've got like these, whoever it is, you've got people now, they are your circles. They are your masjids, they are your friends. If you oppose that voice, you'd just become, you'd be orphanized. Like you'd have nowhere, Bichara yatim, you'd have nowhere to go. Your livelihood would be cut off if you were a teacher. This is why I say, be free people. Allah, be like the birds. Huh?
Why are they preaching that fear Allah, you're going to die, and they don't implement that advice on themselves?
Ayo, Mullah Umar.
They cry, you know, when they make dua, when they shiver, they stand before Allah the day of judgment, they cry, as if they fear Allah, but they contradict what you just said.
Oh, could you do a tea or something?
So it's fake.
You know what? Ibi reminded me of a poem. Okay. That itna ehsaas apna to nahi hai mujhko. That even I don't know about my own situation that much. पर औरों से सुना है कि परेशान हूँ मैं. But other people tell me that I'm distressed. So, inshallah, I mean.
We'll take one more question.
Mashallah. Okay, yeah, well, shall we take some brothers, any questions? Allah, what's...
Just to touch on the point, I was wondering what you thought about Tawassul and Istighatha.
Tawassul and Istighatha, oof. Yeah, Pirani, who should I call out to help me? I mean, what is the purpose of all of this stuff? You know, Istighatha, Tawassul. These are just old. These are like the gods of old, ain't they, that have resurfaced. Because it's hard, Tawheed is hard, I'll be honest with you. It is hard. No, let's be honest. Yeah, you know, I like honesty. Sadiq hu apne qawl mein ghalib khuda gawah, sach kehta hun ke jhoot ki aadat nahi. So that's the... You see, the thing is that, you know, a transcendent, removed God is almost an impersonal God. It's difficult to relate to God because God is something transcendent. We can't picture him, we can't envisage, we can't imagine, we can't he's just there, you know. He's not, it's Tawheed isn't, in some, it's very reason based, but it's not actually easy, contrary to what people think, because it's a very impersonal God almost. I mean, but God isn't an impersonal. I believe God is a personal God, but how do you then bridge that? It becomes difficult. So this is why people find solace in finding something imminent and immediate as an intermediary. They, you know, I'm not saying these people are mushrik. I'm not saying that, okay? Just in case people misunderstand me, because I'm about to give an example, so I don't want... It's like Hinduism. In Hinduism, not the Tawassul isn't... I'm not saying Tawassul is... But in Hinduism, many people don't know that Hindus actually just worship one God. Many people don't know that. Whether it's, they call him Ishwar or Brahma, the great Atma, Paramatma, you know, it's just one. Paramatma isn't like so many different gods. It's the great Atma that it resides in all of us. Isn't this what Hinduism actually is? Ram, you know, Krishna, these people, you know, Ganesh, all these, Hanuman, these people are just manifestations that they use as, you know, that nataqarrab biha, that they use them to get closer to God. Like, because here they've got a visual, I can focus on it. I can, use this one to, this is a personal God. This God is the one of fortune. You know, whether it's going to be one of the Devis or Lakshmi for fortune, or whether it's going to be Hanuman for strength, or whatever problems. And so they've got different gods for that they can personalize and relate to. The situation isn't different in the monotheistic faiths either. Like if you take Christianity, you will have patron saints, Saint George, Saint, you know, you'll have different, like all countries will have their own saint, but they will have particular saints, Saint Andrew, these saints that save them. There's a particular saint for journeys. You'll see certain Christians carrying his cross. It protects them. There's certain, it's not that they don't believe in Jesus. They've already got Jesus, but still they need something closer still. And Muslims are just human beings as well. You know, these things are difficult to escape. I think human beings will always struggle to truly escape to a pure Tawheed, because they find it too distant, like God is too removed to answer me. Hence in Hinduism, nobody really prays to Brahma. Why do they not pray to Brahma? Think about it, he's the ultimate God, but why do they not? Because they say he's too transcendent.
They're not worthy.
No, not that he's not worthy, but why would he be interested in me?
They're not worthy. Like themselves.
Oh yeah, they themselves are not worthy, exactly. Like, why would the ultimate God care about me? I need this thing here, because he can see me and he can. So this is, I'm not saying it's a rational thing, but this is their reasoning. And at a lower level, that's what Muslims are, just humans as well. Like, what I know Allah, but I need to ask Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani in Baghdad to kind of give it to me, or this Pir Sahib in, you know, Lahore, or this Pir Sahib wherever, you know, to kind of give me this because he's closer to me. So it's that same thing, you know. ठीक है, वही बीमारी है चल रही है. आखिर इस बीमारी है दिल ने. No, आखिर यार, I forgot. It'll come to me.
Do you believe in the hadith on the Day of Judgment that the counter argument they use that why don't you go directly to Allah to start the Day of Judgment? Why the Ummah will go to Adam, then Noah, then Ibrahim?
Because they're scared of God. That's what you mean.
They're asking that, isn't that evidence that also...
You see, the problem I have is that I feel that many people in Islam, the image we've presented of God is a very scary image. I don't personally like that image, but each to their own. Some people like it. I feel that God is a merciful God, and it's a, you know, he's a compassionate God, and that's the side that I see of God. But we have this thing that he's a scary, he's a vengeful, he's an angry God. You know, he wants to punish you if you get something wrong. We have this impression that, you know, if it was a human, chalo phir bhi samajh jayega, you know, this guy would understand why I made the mistake. But it's God. How the hell is he going to understand? He's just going to whoop me for it. Like, this is the kind of understanding we have of God. So I find that problematic. I feel that it clashes.
Sorry, you know exactly the point he was making about the hadiths on the intercession on the day of Yom Al-Qiyamah, you get this person to see. But don't they clash with the ayats that on Yom Al-Qiyamah no one can intercede for you on the day?
Yeah, I think these things are just if sahih. Yeah. I think these were just like allegorical truths. Like, you know, the Prophet is just trying to show, if they be true, the hadith is just trying to demonstrate that it's a scary day. That's all. That it's not like, you know, it's not that these things, like, meaning that this is what the hadith is just trying to demonstrate in essence. The kind of essence of it is that it's a very difficult day where you have to worry about yourself. So what's the lesson from that? So take care of yourself now. Like, do the good that you need. Like, don't rely on others. That's the whole point. But at the same time, that hadith is demonstrating the Prophet is a source of hope for people.
Guys, we'll continue with the Q&A, informal Q&A afterwards.
We'll wrap this up, people. Those of you online, I hope you understood much of that. If you didn't, don't worry about it, man. They say half of it I wasn't really fully sober anyway. So, guys, take very good care, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. I'm going to do a blooper now, thinking it's... Cool. Shawan, could you just click that off? Or just... yeah. Or just leave it on recording and it ends up recording some of our conversations.